Hello and welcome to the Terrace Scottish Football Podcast. My name is Shaughan McGuigan. As you can possibly ascertain already, we are not joined by Craig G. Telfer. He has been double booked with winter making way for spring. He is being waxed, and this was the only time slot that was available. However, thankfully, we are joined by somebody who is recently described on Pie and Bovril as having a lovely voice for podcasts. It is Fraser Clarke. Fraser, how are you?
I am very well, and thank you for the lovely introduction of people praising my voice, which is always a nice wee ego boost, because I've always been told right through uni, oh, you've got a lovely voice for radio, which I imagine is a way of saying you don't have the face for television. I mean, you obviously do have the face for television, so you can perhaps tell me.
I'm not entirely sure about that, Fraser. I don't think you don't have the face for television, but what I would say about Pie and Bovril is you are somebody who, I was going to say prolific, but you're certainly a regular poster on Pie and Bovril. And I was actually thinking about this. I don't know if I've ever seen you exchange crosswords on Pie and Bovril or get in some kind of heated debate. Generally speaking, you have you post a lot, but people seem to respect what you post. And fair play for that.
I'm also terrible at being angry and terrible at confrontation, so I just tend to avoid it. It's like something I've got from my dad. So my dad coached my football team when I was growing up, and like really, really nice guy, can't do confrontation. So whenever I saw him getting a wee bit kind of angry with a ref or angry with somebody, it was just really embarrassing. And I think that's rubbed off on me. I just avoid confrontation. I'm too nice to confrontate with people.
Right, but to be fair, I wouldn't say I necessarily go out my way to get confrontation, but the last time I had any interactions whatsoever on Pie and Bovril, I was told to get stuffed, which maybe shows you how much respect you generate online compared to me, so fair play to you.
Maybe it's that treat people like you like to be treated, and maybe you've not done that, or maybe you've said something that somebody's held against you for a long period of time. That's the problem. Like with me coming out here, I finish podcasting, and I've obviously done a couple over the last few weeks, and then I lie in bed and I think, wonder what I said there that somebody's going to pull me up on and get really upset about, and that's not happened. So it's going to happen this week. I'm going to come out with some really hot takes, and people will abuse me online.
Let's see if that does happen. So in terms of this week's podcast, we are not going with the patented 3-game format. Again, that is patented. Craig Telfer rather has mentioned this a few times, and as much as he isn't here, as soon as his red raw areas are feeling better, he will scour the internet to see if anybody else is abusing our 3-game patented format. What we will do is discuss one game. I'll give you 3 guesses what game that is, and use it as a jump-off point to discuss those teams. And then a bit of a grab bag. We will go through all 3 lower leagues. I suppose there is a bit of a theme in terms of maybe new managers and managers that are doing very well. Not necessarily in that first game that we're about to discuss. But that's probably the recurring theme. And then if we have enough time, we will talk about the relegation aspect of League 2. However, Fraser, will we make a start?
Yeah, and it's funny, this first game that we're going to talk about, as soon as I saw the scoreline on Saturday afternoon, and I knew that I was doing this podcast, I was like, right, I need to watch the highlights for that and write some notes down, because that's going to be the first thing that we talk about.
But in fairness, Dunfermline Athletic 0, Morton 5 is the most astonishing scoreline from all 4 divisions at the weekend. What did you make of it?
The highlights were quite harrowing if you're a Dunfermline fan, which thankfully I'm not, so that's fine. And actually, it comes at a good time, because I wanted to talk about Morton, and I'd been kind of kicking myself for not talking about them, because they've gone under the radar a wee bit this season for how good they've been. So I thought, I'll take down some notes and I'll kind of pay attention to what Morton are doing well, so that we're not just giving Dunfermline a kicking. And then I'll hand over to you, and you can give Dunfermline a kicking. And that works for both of us.
I am quite happy with that.
But the aspect, if we're touching on Morton doing well, and I was kind of thinking of how I would sum up Morton. You know that guy, or I think there's been a few from England, who are bringing up the XL bullies to Scotland because there wasn't the ban.
Yes.
It's just all these kind of dangerous dogs that nobody loves being brought up. That's kind of how I feel about this Morton team. Like, it's all these kind of guys who are maybe a wee bit unloved at previous clubs, quite big guys in general. Like, if you were to play against Morton, you'd probably be quite bruised by the end of it, I would imagine. Yeah. Dunfermline certainly were quite bruised, but I imagine that there's probably not a more unpleasant team to play against, a sort of crazy gang mentality. But Dougie Imrie is basically that guy taking all these unloved XL bully footballers to Capello and then turning them into the most loving pets imaginable who are doing a terrific job on the pitch. So that I think their run of form is something like their best run of form since the 80s or 90s that they're on
I
at the
believe
moment.
so, yeah.
Which is incredible, and it's going very much under the radar, and nobody much seems to be talking about Morton. So obviously from watching the highlights, a lot of the goals, if you are a critic of defending, or if you want to pick holes in Morton's performance, you'll say that every one of the goals is probably avoidable from a Dunfermline point of view. And
they get worse. I think
yes.
they stayed from a Dunfermline defensive perspective. I think they get steadily worse as the 5 goals proceed.
Yeah, and you look at the first goal and you think, well, it's not a great goal to lose. They're going to get a wee bit kind of iffy, and then, like you say, it just progressively gets worse and worse as it goes on. And I think I was looking through the sort of teams, because there was a few guys obviously in the Dunfermline team who I think were making their first appearances or quite early appearances who looked incredibly poor. I said I wouldn't give them too much of a kicking, but you watch those highlights and it was the guy whose name I have written down in front of me, but I can't read my own writing. Who I think is he on loan from Cardiff City? Is it?
So they have. I think it's Xavier Benjamin and Malachi Fagan Walcott made up 2 of their back 3, who are both on loan from Cardiff, I believe.
Yeah, so that, because I had an X and I was like, is that an X or a T? And then I couldn't read the rest of it, and I was like, Trevor Benjamin? Who's this? Who looked like incredibly bad in the highlights, incredibly bad. But one of the ways in which they looked so bad, I thought, was that they were just bullied by Morton. They were just thrown about. They looked like youth team players who'd been dropped in at that deep end and just couldn't deal with the physicality of it. And you look at the Morton team, like if you're a 19-year-old Premier League 2 defender, whatever league Cardiff are in, at that sort of under-20s age group, you're coming up against George Oakley and Robbie Muirhead. Like, they're probably going to throw you about a wee bit. And that did look to be the case, that they just were bullied. Robbie Muirhead is probably one of the most interesting players in the country.
Yep.
I'm utterly fascinated by Robbie Muirhead and his career and everything about him, because every time you see him, you think this guy has the potential to be a regular Premier League player, but you also wouldn't have been surprised if he was kicking about in the juniors or kicking about with East Kilbride in a few years. And I was looking at it because I remember when he came in at Morton, he didn't score goals for like a very long time. And in his first 2.5 seasons, which was, I think, COVID affected, he got 10 goals. In his next 2.5 seasons, he's got 31. Like, that speaks volumes. And he's kind of indicative of what Dougie Imrie's done, where he's taken these guys who maybe have something about them, even if it's just the raw physicality, and made them into like really, really effective championship players. And you kind of look at them and think, I don't know what other manager in this division would get this amount out of this squad of players.
Yeah, no, totally. And like, we were very positive about Dougie Imrie last season, and the fact that he was able to get so much out of players who had kind of been disregarded either by other clubs at this level or maybe even by us. Like, maybe we were a wee bit quick to disregard them. But regardless, he gets an extra 5-10% out of players. And even at the start of this season, so after maybe 7 or 8 games, I thought Morton were in big trouble. I genuinely did. I wasn't sure that their recruitment policy over the summer was particularly good. Like, Cut Broadfoot didn't hit the ground running. Alan Power looked like he was at the kind of end of his career. Stephen Boyd, for example, I generally like criticise Stephen Boyd every single summer when he signs for teams. However, again, they have kicked on since then. And suddenly, like, I know Cut Broadfoot didn't play against Dunfermline, but again, if they were to call on him, he now looks like he's absolutely fine. Alan Power had an excellent game, and I do think, in terms of what you've suggested in terms of the back line that Dunfermline had, so Xavier Benjamin and Malachi Fagan Walcott both started in a back 3. This might be the worst possible team that they could conceivably face. And I know that Morton fans bristle against this suggestion that they're a physical team. But, and maybe some people suggest it as a negative. Like, I don't. Like, I'm jealous of the fact that they are able to kind of mix it up, whereas like my team, Wraith Rovers, aren't able to do that. So in terms of, I don't think they're a dirty team, but I think they're physical and that they're a hard team. Like if that makes sense. So they can bully centre halves. You saw that in the highlights. They were so much better than Dunfermline. But in terms of slowing the game down and game management, I think Morton are excellent at it. See if they are playing against a team that has a throw-in, they'll kick the ball away. If they are playing against a team that has a free kick, they'll stand in front of it. They slow the game down, and their game management is absolutely exceptional. And again, I think it all comes down to Dougie Imrie, because I think if you look at that Morton squad, I don't necessarily see it as talent-wise, and I'm not trying to slag him off, I don't necessarily see it as one of the better squads in the Championship, but he has them playing greater than the sum of their parts, and fair play to him, because I'd kind of written him off maybe in September, but here we are, we're now in February, they're 4th place, and it'll be difficult for anybody to dislodge them from the playoff positions.
I think there's sort of two things as well. So the first thing is having that sticky spell at the start of the season and then turning it around. Like, that's the making or breaking of a manager. Every manager will go through that really dodgy spell, maybe especially after the summer, right? He's brought in new players, it's not working. Like, that's where a lot of managers will fail. They won't be able to turn it around. And you'd say, he's been there a wee while now, that if that had been the end of his time, you'd be like, yep, he's done a decent job, but then you move on. The fact he's been able to turn that around is huge, and that reflects so well on Dougie Imrie. The second thing I suppose you'd have to say, and again, like, I hope Morton fans don't take me saying that they bullied Dunfermline or whatever is a bad thing, or anything like that. Please don't come for me in Pine Bovril. Everyone's nice to me, remember? But Morton don't have one of the bigger budgets in the league, I wouldn't imagine. So their option, if they want to get into the playoffs, they're not going to go out and be able to sign the 14 best players or the 14 second best players, or probably even 4 of the best players in the league in certain positions. So they need to find another way of doing it. And that other way of doing it is, like you say, managing games well, is playing to your strengths of your physicality. It's getting the most out of the players you bring in who maybe other clubs have overlooked. So, you've got Robbie Muirhead was at Dundee United. Overlooked there, didn't obviously work out. That's fine. No other club, he didn't have a good time at Dunfermline. No other club really would have taken a punt, probably in the Championship. They've looked at him, they've given him time, and then they've built him back up. George Oakley was obviously let go by Inverness, been built back up into being as good a player as he is now, and a very effective player at that level. So they're absolutely maximising what they've got there and taking advantage of clubs round about them who maybe have greater budgets, more talented players, but who aren't performing to the best of their abilities. So I think it's like a huge credit to Dougie Imrie. And this season, like, surely this is not going to go down well with Morton fans, surely there have to be bigger clubs who are starting to take a wee look at Dougie Imrie and going, what more can he do at Morton before somebody in the, bottom 6 in the Premiership takes a punt? Because he's got to be worth it.
But I mean, you're right in terms of Morton fans wouldn't like to hear that, but by the same token, any club that is in the Championship, and even bottom 6 in the Premiership, if you have a manager who's performing very, very well, then you become a target for clubs who are bigger and have bigger budgets. And yes, you're right. I would presume that Dougie Imrie is maybe on a short list for clubs that might be looking to jettison their manager at some point in the future, because ultimately it's now the second season where Dougie Imrie is really impressed. So yes, fair play. And how do you think Morton's season is going to progress? So they're 4th in the league now. Airdrie are just behind them, 4 points, but with a game in hand. Like, do you think they'll make the playoffs? Like, do they genuinely have a chance of getting promoted?
I think they'll make the playoffs. The only thing that's saying that they might end up getting promoted is that kind of Livingston connection, and that they do remind me a wee bit of that Livingston team that went up, where it was just it was maybe not the best or second best team in the league at the time, but they were just a really solid squad, a really well organised team to play against. So they do have kind of shades of that and the sort of crazy gang feel about them, like that Livingston team that went up. And there was just it was like you wouldn't like going to Livingston away, going to the Tony Macaroni or whatever it was called back then. Probably teams don't look forward to going to Capello now. And I think that's something they can use massively in their favour. Well, obviously, last week, Billy Dodd certainly didn't enjoy going to Caplow during the COVID season, but so maybe teams don't enjoy it anyway. But then use that in your advantage. I think going up would be too big a stretch for them. I hope somebody can clip this and put it up at the end of the season, because I would love to see Morton in the Premiership. I think that would just be great. And also Renfrewshire derbies in the Premiership. Like, that's a derby where there's a lot of hatred.
Good. That would be good.
It's one of my favourite derbies. I think because it's not played all that often. I know they play the kind of pre-season ones fairly regularly, but like actual league games, you don't get them all that often. There's a real strong dislike there. Yeah, that's a good derby. That'd be a nice derby to have in the Premiership. I would love to see them go up. I think that at the moment, right now, with things as they are and their squad as it is, and avoiding any kind of major injuries or anything like that, I don't see any reason why they can't finish top 4, certainly. And if they finish top 4, I think it'll be a stretch to get over the line and into the Premiership, but you know how playoffs work, and if you go in with momentum, that's kind of all you need. I mean, how many times has a team, not necessarily the Premiership playoff, but how many times has a team won a lower league playoff where they've not been the best or second best team in the league, but they've gone in on a good run of games, bit of confidence, and they're maybe playing teams whose confidence isn't quite as high, or maybe a team who are thinking, oh, we've missed out in the league title, like we're a wee bit on a downer now, like Dumbarton in last season's playoffs. It's a wee bit of a downer. And then Morton are just, well, we're happy to be here and we're going to back ourselves to go and give you a bit of a bruising time with our team of XL bullies.
And what about Dunfermline? Because for me, I you can sometimes watch a game and maybe it finishes a bit of a whitewash. Maybe it's 4-0 or 3-0 or whatever. You say, oh, well, it wasn't a 4-0 game, it wasn't a 3-0 game. However, this very much felt like a 5-0 game. Like, it could have been more. This was in terms of championship performances, I'm thinking about maybe Arbroath versus Dundee United at the start of the season, like the very first game on the Friday night. Like, yep. that was dreadful. They then lost even more at Tannadice. Again, that was a dreadful performance. I really do think that this game was up there in terms of poor performances in the championship this season. What do you make of Dunfermline under James McCabe?
I think I suppose pound for pound, this probably is the worst performance in the championship this season, because you look at the Arbroath one, you think, right, well, they're part-time, they've certainly had a kind of smaller squad. Both games, I think, against Dundee United, they had like the quite heavy defeats. They were both Friday night, so they were both midweeks. Yeah. So they've got the kind of part-time aspect there. Like, for Dunfermline at home to be getting trounced like that by Morton, when you would imagine Dunfermline might have a slightly bigger budget. They've certainly got a bigger support. You would imagine they might have a slightly bigger budget. Is pound for pound the worst result of the season, I think. In terms of Dunfermline, it feels like there are issues from last season that maybe you can get away with in League One are being pretty brutally exposed. And I'm also... So James McCabe kind of strikes me as one of these managers who maybe has a shelf life, where, like we were talking about with Dougie Imrie, but in reverse, where he'll maybe get results for a bit, starts to go a wee bit stale, he needs to be turning it around, and he isn't capable of doing that, and it's just going to fizzle out, or it's going to get worse and worse and worse. You look at, well, the first thing, I guess, that, and he wasn't solely at fault, but Dennis Mehmet, is he good enough to be a Dunfermline goalkeeper in the Championship? Because I'm really not convinced, and I know he got a lot of clean sheets last season, but that was Dunfermline in League One, and that was a team like romping to the title with very solid defenders ahead of him. Suddenly when he's in there, he's more experienced than the sort of younger guys that they've got in defence. Not convinced. He didn't cover himself in glory, certainly for the fifth goal, with the kind of pathetic throw out that was then intercepted, and then Garrity kind of deflected it in. Everyone knew where he was trying to put the shot, and just nobody did anything about it. Sort of bobbles in at the far corner. But I wonder if he's just indicative of problems maybe across the board. Like, they're not scoring enough goals because they've maybe got strikers who are very effective in League One, could maybe do a job to keep you up at a stretch in the Championship, but anything more than that, and if you're a Pars fan, you're probably going to be, finishing 8th in the league isn't really what you got promoted to do. You're maybe looking at that and going, need a wee bit more quality up front, maybe to be honest, just all across the pitch, need a wee bit more quality, and they don't have a manager like Dougie Imrie. Not that I'm trying to bum him up something awful in this podcast, but they don't have a manager who's maybe capable of getting that extra 10% out of a player that they don't even know they've got. So I just felt like that was everything probably that Dunfermline fans have maybe been fearing for the last wee while, just got brutally exposed.
Yeah. So McCabe, For me, this was a season where McCabe could absolutely have done away with my theory that he's a bit of an Alan Johnson in terms of getting teams out of a division that they maybe don't expect to be in, but then struggles to kind of compensate when they get into the league above, I suppose. And I'm still not entirely certain that I can write him off from that, because they have such a terrible injury record. I totally appreciate that. However, see, like based on Saturday, based on that 5-0 defeat to Morton, like last season, and again, I kind of raise this as a concern about McCabe. The feeling would start games against part-time teams, and it wouldn't go particularly well. And it would get to half-time, and it would be 1-0 down, or then maybe 0-0. And then he would sort things. He would make a change to the formation, or he would make a substitution. And then Dunfermline would kind of sort things in the second period. And I did suggest last season that Dunfermline wouldn't get away with that this season. But the weird thing is, it doesn't feel like he's done that this season. Like, it almost feels like he is steadfast in his belief that a back three is how he wants to go, and that they want to play football out from the back. And I get that their injury issues means that he probably has fewer levers to pull at half-time or in the second half or whatever. But regardless, it kind of felt like what he wanted to impart onto the game on Saturday was making things worse in terms of playing out for the back. So Denise Mehmet has dreadful distribution. Absolutely. So playing football from the back becomes infinitely more difficult when you have that issue. You have two centre-halves that have barely been there 5 minutes, but you're playing a back three. Again, you want them to play football. That didn't really work. They were absolutely bullied by Morton. But he didn't really make any attempts to change it. And I know it probably doesn't really mean anything. But the kind of optics of him not being out with the kind of dugout, and not kind of ordering people about, and not shouting, and like he was just in the dugout for the entire game. Like, that, optic wise, that doesn't look great, and it probably doesn't amount to a whole hill of beans. However, everything can change in the Championship in the course of a couple of weeks. So they have Queen's Park and Arbroath coming up in the next couple of weeks. They could win both those games, and suddenly you're saying, well done, James McCabe. You've navigated a terrible injury period. You're not that far away for a top four. Fair play. However, I can understand the Dunfermline fans that are very, very annoyed at his approach this season. And yes, the injury issues they've had has affected them. However, it kind of feels like Dunfermline as a team are kind of cutting back this season. Like, see, in terms of the recruitment, they've brought in about 9 players in terms of loan players and permanent signings. Almost all of them have been 22 and under, and even the ones that have a wee bit of experience. Michael O'Halloran, poor season at Cove last season. I wouldn't have been bringing him in. And up front, my goodness, who did they bring up front? Bear with me.
That's how big an impact he's made. That whoever it is, it's just not coming to your head, because he's made absolutely zilch impact. They also had David Waterspoon training with them for a very long time, but didn't sign him.
Well, do you know something? So that's, again, that kind of sums Dunfermline up this season. So Alex Jakubiak is exactly who I was thinking of. Again, somebody who is probably better in theory than he is in practice. But in terms of the club, I know there was a theory that there was a huge disparity between what Witherspoon was looking for and what Dunfermline could provide. However, I'm struggling to believe that Inverness, a team who Apparently can only survive if they build a battery farm. Was able to provide something for David Witherspoon for him to come up there compared to Dunfermline. There is something wrong at this moment in time with Dunfermline. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but they don't seem to be a club that is moving forward. That feels like they're moving backwards at this moment in time.
It's funny because when clubs get promoted, you either get a club that will come up and then they'll just carry that momentum and they'll almost steamroller into the next division, and they'll maybe have a really good first season, and then maybe it'll start to drop off and they'll find their natural level again. But then you get clubs who come up, and I don't know if it's like it's taken them by surprise that they've gone up, or it's like, oh, we've gone up. Is that the going rate for a player in this level? It shouldn't really be the case for Dunfermline, because by stature they have been a championship club or a premiership club for, well, with the exception of that kind of dreadful period with administration and John Potter and everything, for a very long time. But it feels like they've gone up and they've not carried any momentum and they've not carried any good feeling into it. And they've tried to do it maybe on the cheap. I don't know if this season, if it's like, right, this season's about consolidation, and then next season we'll put a wee bit of money aside and then we'll look to really build next season. But the championship this year, certainly the playoff places are there for the taking. Like, it's not like you've got 4 incredibly strong teams who you look at on paper, like the old days of the Rangers, Hearts, Hibs one, where you're like, that's 3 out of the 4 places taken. Like, you've not got that in the championship this season. So I find that a really weird technique to take. And if you've gone up and you've got that good feeling, like you beat Falkirk to the title, you trounced Falkirk to the title in the end, like that's going to give everyone a really good feeling about the place, because there was a title race. You weren't just, beating their kind of run-of-the-mill part-time League One teams. There was a wee bit of animosity there. There was like sellout games at East End Park and the Falkirk Stadium. Take that good feeling, make a couple of decent additions in the summer, because everyone knew where Dunfermline were weak. Like, if we can see it, then there's going to be far smarter, far more important people at Dunfermline who can see it. Make the right additions and just keep that good feeling going, and see if you can get into the playoffs this year almost off momentum rather than anything else. But it's almost like they've gone up and they're like, well, we're just happy to be here. We'll just see how long we can kind of wait it out. And that shouldn't be the case for a club of Dunfermline's size, I wouldn't think. Like, their fan base, I can't imagine being overly accepting of that. Like, if they go up and they say, right, our aim's to finish 8th, Dunfermline fans, I don't think they'd be very into that idea. Other clubs, if they go up and they say, look, we're looking to finish 8th, consolidate, stay in the league, fan base would be like, yep, that's absolutely understandable. But Dunfermline, but that's kind of what their business suggests.
It's very unusual for a team to win League One and then struggle the next season in the Championship. And again, you're absolutely right. Like, Dunfermline, I think, are a big Championship team. Like, they have a lot of season ticket holders. They have big crowds, and yet somehow it just feels like they're I don't know, they're cutting back. But the fact that they absolutely needed experience, either in the summer window or the January window. Experience costs money, and it feels like they haven't went down that route. And less so in the January window, but I kind of got the impression that James McCabe was very frustrated in the summer window about recruitment. So again, as much as I think I thought this season was a good way to judge James McCabe about how good a manager he is, again, I'm not sure, because they have such a terrible injury record, and again, it feels like he has kind of one hand tied behind his back. But we'll see. How do you think Dunfermline will go on this season?
I mean, they should be fine. But that performance suggests that they might not be. I think our growth don't look very good. Let's be quite honest about that at the moment.
I suppose that if you want, like, Arbroath have an equally bad injury record as Dunfermline, so again they'll have players coming back, so maybe they can improve in the last kind of, I don't know, whatever, third of the season. Have
you noticed as well though, and it's maybe a two-way thing, that see when clubs are struggling, players drop out more. See if a club's winning every week, you don't seem to get hit with the same injury problem. So I don't know how much of that ends up going in circles, where players are like, well, I'm going to be playing every week, my knee's flipping agony, but I'll play every week to get through it because I'm not losing my place in this side. And then if you're maybe you've lost 6 games in the spin, you're getting stick from the fans, you're just like, that's the knee flaring up, like, that'll be me, I'll be I'll just call it a day for the next 6 weeks and just wait till the nice kind of spring weather comes round. So I do wonder how much those things are linked. You look at Queen's Park, like, you'd expect Queen's Park to improve now, I think. I think he says, sounding kind of cautiously optimistic, if Queen's Park improve, that's bad news for Dunfermline. If Arbroath improve, that's bad news for Dunfermline. And there just feels like there's a bit of a malaise around Dunfermline. Queen's Park maybe do have a bit of a new manager bounce. Arbroath's funny because you feel like the fans are kind of pissed off with how this season's gone and how last season's gone. But there's also still just that wee bit of magic about Arbroath and just that wee bit of a buzz that they're not going to be getting on their team's back probably in the same way as Dunfermline fans will if things get tough. Queen's Park fans won't. I think Dunfermline will stay up, but having watched that on Saturday, I don't really know why I think that.
Fraser, I hope you're totally wrong. I hope they get relegated, and I think it's a possibility. Well, listen, moving on from both Morton and Dunfermline, let's stay in the Championship, however, and let's go to Airdrie. So I've had a wee bit of a bodying online when it comes to Airdrie this season. I said in the preview podcast that they would struggle to stay up. My opinion was based on the fact that they conceded hundreds of goals, not literally, in League One. And it felt like it didn't really recruit in the summer in terms of, augmenting that squad. However, I think in terms of, getting more out of their squad than you would expect, I think Airdrie have been absolutely excellent this season. So last game I watched them in, they defeated Wraith Rovers in the semi-finals of the SPFL Challenge Trophy. They will now play TNS from Wales/England. I believe it's at the Falkirk Stadium in March. But Fraser, what have you made of Airdrie and Rhys McCabe this season?
I'm like you. I thought they did a thing where they seemed to sign a lot of players who were very, very young, who maybe had a decent calibre to them, but I had no idea who they were. Yeah.
So literally all of the players this season, I had a wee look. I think all of the players, with the exception of Nikolai Todorov, has been 20 or below. And a number of them, maybe not all of them, but a number of them have come from the Concilium Football Agency, which is something to do with Jackie McNamara. And again, like there's loads of things with Airdrie that doesn't necessarily add up. And you would think, right, well, if you're signing almost all of your players that are teenagers and coming from the same football agency that Jackie McNamara runs, it feels like you're doing yourself a disservice. However, it seems to be working. And whether that's to do with the quality of the players or whether that's to do with the quality of Rhys McCabe's management, I'm not entirely sure. But fair play to them. They've done an incredible job this season.
Yeah, and I think McCabe's so impressive. I mean, I remember, so when he came in to Airdrie under Ian Murray, it would have been the season Suns were relegated. And I kind of thought, Rhys McCabe, he was all right at Dunfermline. Like, I remember seeing him playing against us and I thought he looked like quite a nice player, but didn't really, I didn't look at that and think, oh, they've signed Rhys McCabe, that's a game changer. And then Murray played him at centre half against us, and I'm like, Rhys McCabe at centre, and he was the best player on the pitch.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, this guy, it wasn't just the way he was using the ball, like his quality on the ball was phenomenal. It was just the way he was talking to people around him. And I thought, what age is he? Because I'm sure he's not that much older than me. I think he's 31, 32 now. And I remember looking at him and thinking, you play like somebody who is a lot older than you are, but you've still got the physical attributes of someone who's younger. And that's kind of what he's doing as a manager. Like, he has been superb for Airdrie. He's managing the team by and large like someone who has a lot more experience particularly working with young players. But then he's still got the ability to kind of pull on the boots and go out and make a difference on the pitch as well. And that's so difficult for a player manager to combine both, especially when I think Callum Fordyce is his cousin or something, isn't he? So you've got your manager and your assistant manager both playing and managing the team and doing an exceptional job of it. I think that's so impressive. And he, to go one better than Ian Murray in terms of getting Airdrie up, was a very, very big achievement, especially because there was times where you watched his post-match and he was doing it with, Brian from Airdrie TV, who I did a commentary with a few years ago on the game Suns lost and finished with 8 men. And we should do a guest podcast where it's just that game and watching the highlights. But I was watching an interview, I think it was last season after a defeat, or might be the start of the season or last season, where he was just very short with Brian and his answers. He was like, Rhys, you're taking that. He was just like, wasn't good enough. That was it. That's all he gave. And I thought, whoa, maybe he's not going to be very good at man management or something. You know, he's just going to be, the pressure gets to him and he just can't handle it. But that doesn't seem to be an issue. Like, he seems to be managing this group of young players superbly. The fact that he's still, what did I say, 32, 31, something like that?
I think he's maybe 30, 31.
Yeah, so like he's incredibly young for a manager, but to be managing at this level with an Airdrie team that it's not been bankrolled by the looks of it. I don't doubt they'll have players on good money, but they're not making signings that are making you go, you know, like when Cove brought in Mark Reynolds or something like that. They're not bringing in really any players you look at and go, right, fair bit of experience, fair bit of money there. Not really. Like, to be developing these young players, to be doing it in kind of his own style, kind of his own image that he's building a team there. I think he's done a phenomenal job, and it's strange to say it, but I really like seeing Airdrie do well under him. I really like seeing Airdrie do well. That's like a thing that opposition fans don't really say, but I've just got so much admiration for him because I think he's doing a great job, and I love the way they're doing it with these young players that I've no idea who half of them are. They come in, and within 5 games, you look at them and go, oh, hang on, like, how have they found another one? Where are they getting these guys? Jackie McNamara's phone book is just full of extremely talented teenagers.
It's remarkable. Like, I went back, just out of interest, I went back like 12 months. So after 21 games of last season, Airdrie were 5th in League One. Only 3 teams had conceded more goals, and that was Clyde, Peterhead and Queen of South. And we spoke about Airdrie often last season. And the thing that I think everybody felt would hold them back was yes, they were exciting to watch, absolutely. But it felt like there was a naivety about them as well, in terms of how much they wanted to attack teams. The Edinburgh game was the ultimate, and obviously Rhys McCabe was interviewed afterwards, and he said that I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but he basically said that that was his style of play, and he wouldn't kind of change on that. And you're like, right, well, that may ultimately come back to haunt you. But you go forward 12 months, they're now 5th in the Championship. They are 4 points behind Morton, they have a game in hand. Only Dundee United have conceded fewer goals. So see, in terms of Rhys McCabe's claims that he wouldn't change how he plays, that's not the case at all. They've went from being the most kind of gung-ho, entertaining team in League One to being a good team. I don't think they're a dull team to watch in the Championship. But defensively, they're so good. And like, I know I said that I thought they would struggle at the start of the season, but that was based on the fact that they conceded so many goals and they barely brought anybody in to augment that squad. So I thought, right, well, they're going to concede more than the 51 that they conceded in League One. They're not going to score 80 odd goals in the Championship, and to be fair, that has turned out to be the case. But like, I watched them on Friday night. They are an infuriating team to watch from a Wraith Rovers perspective, I suppose. Totally being biased, but they are so well drilled. They are so organised. There are players throughout that team that a lot of people, myself included, didn't think were necessarily at Championship level. However, like, they're so, like, did I think like Callum Fordyce and Craig Watson were necessarily going to be some of the standout defenders in the Championship? I didn't. And even the fact that they have had like points in the season where some of the better players have been unavailable. So like Murray Aitken at the start of the season in the middle of the park was excellent. He got injured. Doesn't matter. Cammy Ballantyne at fullback got injured. Doesn't matter. They've coped with that. Megwa has went back to Hibs. Like, he's been excellent this season. Doesn't matter. It just feels like they are seamlessly. Other players can slot in when important players miss out. But again, I think that comes down to how well drilled and how coached they are under McCabe's influence. I've been honestly so impressed by them.
Well, that's the thing as well. If you've got a group of players that is effectively the same group of players that, like you say, conceded a barrel load of goals in League One, and you've been able to take them up to another division, adapt how they play, adapt how they're set up, so that you basically transform the team from a team that's winning 5-4 every week to a team that's winning 1-0 every week. Like, how do you do that with a group of players? How do you get them all to basically adapt in that one way and all to start playing in a unit that's completely opposite to the way it's been. I think that speaks volumes about like Rhys McCabe's ability, not so much as a manager, but as a coach above all else. And I just think like that's remarkable. I can't really think of any team that's been able to change its style so much. I think they still retain a McCabe sort of style about them in terms of like a lot of passing football, younger players, like having a wee bit of pace about them as well. But I think to take a team in one season as a very young manager and turn it around to adapt to the different circumstances you find yourself in, like that's incredible. That is genuinely incredible.
Do you think that Airdrie benefit from the fact that he is still playing at this moment in time? So you would imagine in terms of teams that might be interested in Rhys McCabe, might be in the Premiership. Let's say it was bottom six. If a bottom six team was to come in for him, he probably wouldn't be able to play, and he's still quite young. So do you think that could do you think he could end up staying at Airdrie for more seasons because he's able to play because of his circumstances, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
I think it'll depend on the opportunity that comes up. So if it's one, I assume he's absolutely deadly serious about a career in management. He's not just taking this on to kind of dip his toe in the water and see how it goes. And if he's not, then Rhys, and you're listening, you should be. So say some like a really big job came up from, say, Hibs came up from. I don't think you say no to that. But say a less appealing job, Livingston job came up. And you think, do I want to hang up the boots to go to that sort of level, to go to that sort of club where I'm probably backing myself if I'm him to get to have interest from the Premiership or maybe even from down south? Because he played down south for a bit, but I would also look at that if I was involved in a team in League One or League Two in England and I was just trying to look about for somebody new. He's young enough, he's adaptable, he's probably quite mouldable, so he's obviously gone into Airdrie and they've been like, I assume we're going down, we've given you this budget, we're going down this sort of younger player route, and he's managed to adapt and mould himself to suit that. So I think it would depend on the job that came up. What I would say is that if he's serious about management, then I would think that it shouldn't, because you go, right, well, you've maybe got, I mean, he could play on a fair bit, but you say realistically probably going to be at his peak 33, 34, then you start to probably get over that sort of hump. I'd say he's maybe even a late developer in terms of how good he's gone on to be for a player for Airdrie, but once you're over that hump, you think, am I going to sacrifice potentially the next 20, 30 years of my career just to keep kicking a ball about for a wee bit more? Probably not. But it might be a kind of useful excuse to convince himself to stay at Airdrie for a wee bit longer. Yeah,
you're right. I suppose it depends who comes in for him, but listen, if Airdrie continue in the same vein, then he will absolutely be on shortlists for clubs, certainly in Scotland's top flight and maybe even down south. Let's leave Airdrie. Let's continue with the A theme. Scott Brown has recently been appointed the manager of Ayr United. He had an excellent result against Queen's Park. Not necessarily a great performance against Queen's Park, nevertheless. Got 3 points against them. And then on Saturday, they lost 2-1 to Dundee United. It might have been the opposite. I thought they performed very well, but ultimately got 0 points. Great goal actually from Jamie Murphy. And then, my goodness, Charlie Albinson should have done better with both goals from Tony Watt and Docherty. Were you surprised at the fact that Scott Brown has been appointed the Ayr United manager? And I suppose, what do you expect from him going forward?
I'd say I was surprised, but maybe I was surprised because it was Scott Brown. So if you call him Scott Smith and you say he's played, you look solely at the managerial career, say this is what he did at Fleetwood, you'd be like, yeah, fair enough, going to a club like Ayr. So it was maybe I was drawn in a wee bit by the big name being Scott Brown and, thinking he might be able to name his way into a Premier League job, a bit like Kenny Miller did when he got the Livingston job. Just like use that name and get yourself a job. I think it's a very interesting appointment. I think his time at Fleetwood was quite mixed. It wasn't a roaring success. It wasn't absolutely god awful. It was just kind of a wee bit mixed. It's also the second in a row, like really quite big name appointment that Ayr have made. Like getting Lee Bullen up when they did, I thought that was a great appointment. That obviously didn't really work out. well, it certainly didn't work out towards the end. He maybe showed flashes here and there that it looked like it was going to be better than it was, but it never felt fully convincing. And I thought that at the time, from reading everything Sheffield Wednesday fans were saying about his time as an interim manager there and time as a coach there, I thought it could be a really excellent appointment, and it didn't work out. So I think I like the idea of Scott Brown as a manager, but I've absolutely no idea how it'll work out. Like, no idea whatsoever, because I didn't see enough of his Fleetwood team, or really a great deal at all, other than looking at results and things like that, to know if they were overperforming or underperforming or anything like that. But then you've also got to bear in mind he's dropped into the Scottish Championship, so it's a completely different level. He's going to be working with a different calibre of players. He seems quite impressive as a manager. Like, the way he talks, I think his career speaks for itself. You'd also respect him instantly because of that. I think as a player, you'd be like, right, well, if I'm a 21-year-old centre midfielder and I can learn something from Scott Brown, like I can just leech onto him and take all that knowledge that he's got. But then I think back to how things kind of ended at Aberdeen with him on the pitch there especially, and think the going starts to get a wee bit tough at Ayr, like it did at Aberdeen. He didn't maybe look like the best sort of guy to have around the place. So I have no idea how that's going to go. And I'm really, really interested to find out, actually.
No, you're right. So I was surprised they ended up at Ayr, only because I thought he'd maybe try and hold out for a kind of bottom 16 in the Premiership. You're right, a Livingston or a Ross County. But to be fair, he went down south, was prepared to go to Fleetwood, a team who, as far as I'm aware, their owner went to jail, which is probably a red flag in terms of how well he could do at that club. I do think there's also a suggestion that because of the type of player he is, or was rather, that he will just like kick arses. But I often thought that Scott Brown kind of played up to that thing, that he was a hard man. I'm not saying he wasn't a hard man. I wouldn't like to fall out with him, but I think he's quite I think off the park he's quite softly spoken, a wee bit more cerebral than he's maybe given credit for. That doesn't mean he's a good manager. And I know there's only 2 games that he's been in charge of. I didn't think the win over Queen's Park was a great performance against Dundee United. However, I thought they played quite well. And in terms of if you're looking for, I don't know, crumbs of comfort, I suppose, in terms of from Lee Bullen to Scott Brown, I thought Lee Bullen was very back to front. I didn't think his Ayr United teams were particularly good to watch. I didn't think he was a great manager. Yes, it was good that he came in and he wasn't one of the usual names. It didn't work, ultimately. And eventually, I suppose it didn't work. Against Dundee United, I thought that the tempo about them was a wee bit more. I thought they played a wee bit more football than maybe they did under Lee Bullen. And ultimately, I mean, if they had Logan Chalmers, who they couldn't play because he is on loan from Dundee United, like they probably do have a decent forward line that can play football. So I'm interested to see how they do. The only thing that I would say in terms of a negative, I don't think it necessarily fixed anything in that kind of January transfer window. That's not Scott Brown's fault. Like there are rumours that there is an Ayr United team that looks after transfers. I don't know how it works, but ultimately, there's a lot of players left in January. A number of players, maybe half a dozen, and I'm not entirely sure they've fixed the things that the Ayr United need to get fixed. So Charlie Albinson, the goalkeeper, there's a suggestion, I've seen it mentioned a few times, that he was on the better goalkeepers in the Championship last season. I would thoroughly disagree. And in terms of the 2 goals that Dundee United scored at the weekend, I thought it was dreadfully at fault for both. I mean, really, really poor. I think in the full-back position, they haven't addressed that. But I do think from maybe midfield to up front. So if you have Jamie Murphy, who scored a brilliant goal from a set piece against Dundee United, Anton Dowds, if you can get him scoring again, I do think he's a decent Championship forward, and Logan Chalmers on the other side. That should be more than enough to keep them up, and then probably start again ultimately in the summer. I suspect that Scott Brown will steer them out of trouble. I don't think they'll finish in the top 4. and it'll be interesting to see what he does from summer onwards.
I'm interested as well to see how he deals with Aidan McGeady, who I think by all accounts looks completely done, and might be a wee bit. Well, it'll be an interesting test of his man management, because I assume that there's a personal relationship there from their time together at Celtic. I assume. It's not to say they get on, to be fair, but it might be one that's a wee bit awkward. I can imagine if you've got a player who maybe you've known since, they're similar sort of ages and you've known since he was younger, you've maybe played alongside with him being quite established at Celtic, being one of the best players, to then have that conversation where you go, you're maybe not much use to me at this stage. Like that's probably a horrible thing to do as a manager, for any manager, but especially when you are a wee bit younger, and that'll be a test. And if he keeps playing McGeady, or maybe starting him in games, I think there'll be a few Ayr fans going, has he got the kind of minerals for this job that he's going to be hard enough on players who aren't his pals? Because I think that's one of the biggest things that gets managers, like younger managers especially, is when they sign a few players that maybe they have a personal relationship with, and then they aren't able to drop them or discipline them or eventually cut ties with them, because it's that blurred line where you've signed somebody who maybe is your pal or was your pal, and it just becomes a wee bit difficult. Certainly, like Ayr fans would have had that with Mark Roberts. I think he signed a lot of players who were ex-teammates who were past it or who just weren't good, and that's ultimately why it didn't work for Mark Roberts. So that might be a wee interesting thing just to keep an eye on.
So it's funny you should mention that, because I was thinking something similar in terms of Alloa Athletic, who's the next team that we're about to look at, and Andy Graham, who has been their manager since, was it November? He was appointed. How do you think, because Craig Telfer has worked with Andy Graham a few times, certainly met him a few times, and he has always been of the opinion that he would be a sterling manager. What about yourself? I would imagine that you've interviewed him a few times. How do you think he will do as a manager, and how do you think his managerial career has started with Alloa?
Have you met Andy Graham before?
No, but I only heard good things about him.
Oh, he's just the most brilliant guy. Like I think Telfer probably will have told you, so just the most lovely, interesting, engaging, brilliant guy. Like I wanted Andy Graham to be our next manager for a very long time, and then we had the Scottish Cup event that Craig Telfer hosted with Andy Graham at the Rock, and he made a wee comment there. Somebody was like, I think they did audience questions, and somebody put their hand up and was like, "Can you come back?" And he was just like, "Oh, like I'd kind of love to come back," thing, something like that, because his time at Dumbarton obviously was hugely, hugely successful for the club and for him personally. And I was like, make that man our next manager, go on, like I want it more than anything. And then about 10 days later, he was appointed Alloa boss, and I was really crestfallen. It was like, at primary school, when the girl that you kind of fancy and you think you've been working on, and then she gets picked by one of your pals at the school disco. That's how I felt.
No, I know exactly what you mean, and that is a real kind of gut punch. How have you? What have you thought about his initial time at Alloa? Because I remember, like, his first game was a 3-0 defeat against Edinburgh, and I was like, my goodness, that is, I mean, literally, it could not have started any more poorly. However, since then, I think it's 4 wins, 3 draws, and maybe 2 defeats, and the 2 defeats were against Motherwell and Falkirk. They're now, I think, a point behind Montrose, who are 4th. So it seems that he's certainly, I mean, it's not that Alloa were doing dreadfully. I think what I would say about Brian Rhys, in terms of what Alloa fans would say about him, that didn't seem to be a settled starting 11. There didn't seem to be a settled playing style. Another thing I would say about Brian Rhys is, and you would probably know better than me, arguably, I never thought he came across that pleasantly in terms of post-game interviews. And I do think if that's all you have about you in terms of lambasting players, in terms of trying to get a performance, and maybe that isn't the case, but I just think Andy Graham comes across so well. I would imagine players would want to play for Andy Graham and want to give a brilliant performance for Andy Graham more than they would for Brian Rhys. I don't know.
That's certainly how I would feel. Like, see, so for the Dumbarton 150th stuff, I interviewed him because I was going to kind of players who'd played a key part in that, and he was obviously captain in the championship years. see, writing up his interview, I wanted him to be happy with it, like more than anybody. I wanted him to see it and be like, he's done a really good job there. So I absolutely get that. I think his start's been very solid. It's maybe not been blowing people away or anything like that, but it's been pretty solid, which is probably what a club like Alloa should be at. I think what he'll be really good at, like you say, is I think he'll bring everyone together. I think he'll bring players together. I think he'll bring the fans together. I think everyone will buy into it. The Alloa squad this season is quite good, but I don't think it's anything special. I will be really interested to see the business he does over the summer, because I think there'll be a lot of players who will sign for an Andy Graham team. Maybe, like I said, it could be that difficult one where he's going to be signing players who have been teammates. But I can imagine if you're a young player, maybe you don't know him, like personally, you've not played with him or anything. You sit down, you talk to that man for half an hour and then tell me you don't want to sign for his team, because I think he will be so good. And I know that was the kind of role Jack Ross had when he was at Dumbarton, that he could basically sell players this dream because he was such a good talker. Like, I really would get players to buy into what he was selling. And I just think that's where Andy Graham will excel. And I'm really interested to see. I think this season they could finish top 4, they might not. They won't go down or anything. There's no danger of that. So it becomes a case of him learning and then identifying targets, which I don't doubt he's already doing, and building for next season. And I'd be really interested to see how they go.
And I do think it's interesting as well in terms of, so based on that 3-2 win against Annan at the weekend, you look at who started and you look at who was on the bench. And I would imagine if you're a new manager who is essentially feeling their way into the management game, and based on the fact that, like, Brian Rhys maybe didn't have a kind of definitive starting 11 and didn't have a definitive style of play, there's a lot of experienced players at Alloa. And if Andy Graham was going to go down that route of having, right, here's my starting 11, here's how I'm going to play, I've got loads of experienced players, it's easier maybe to play them than leave them on the bench. However, that isn't what he was doing. So based on Saturday, you had Connor Salmon was on the bench, Ali Roy was on the bench, Luke Donnelly was on the bench, Kevin Colley was on the bench, John Robertson was on the bench. They have been the kind of mainstay of Alloa for a long time. Whereas you had Bobby Wales leading the line up front, 18, on loan from Kilmarnock, scored 2 goals. Taylor Stephen, 19, wide right. You had Ethan Sutherland, 17, playing in the team. So it feels like he is quite happy to make difficult decisions, even though he's only, I'm saying it's difficult decisions, I'm kind of guessing, but he's only a couple of months into his managerial tenure, and he isn't afraid to make decisions. I think it's what I'm trying to get at.
I think the big thing as well is that players will probably accept being dropped or not being in the starting lineup if they feel they can talk to the manager about it. And if he can explain why, or explain what they need to do to maybe get themselves back in the team and that sort of thing. And I imagine he's very, I mean, like, you can see from his post-match straight away, like, he's a very good communicator. He's been club captain, he's been captain at Dumbarton before that, he's been, I think, captain Stirling Albion before that as well. So he's somebody who's clearly got very good personal skills. And you feel like if you go and knock on Andy Graham's door and you say, Gaffer, how come I'm not starting, or what do I need to do? He'll maybe sit down and he'll break it down to you, say, this is what I'm looking for from you. You know, this guy's playing at the moment, but if his form tails off, I would need you to be on this in training and this in training, and you'll get yourself back in that starting lineup. I feel like he'll be a very good man manager. I feel like I'm just being proper lovely to him, but I mean, just in the times I've met him and the times I've spoken to him, like, everything about him suggests that I would like to work for him. Like, if my editor left tomorrow and they said, Andy Graham's come in, he's never edited a newspaper before, but like, he's got the job for some reason, your editor's gone off to manage Alloa Athletic, Andy Graham's got the job. I feel like I could phone him up and talk to him about it, and we'd be on the same page by the end of that phone call, which was a journalism related pun as well. And
unless he replaced you with a teenager, I mean, that would be frustrating.
Yeah, but I feel like he could explain it and I'd be like, you know what, you're right, this teenager's much better than me. So that's absolutely fine. He brings in Bobby Wales and it turns out he's really good at writing. Just writes great court copy.
Well, listen, I suppose there's been one big managerial appointment this week, and we need to discuss it as course. East Fife, so Greg McDonald resigned on, I think it was Monday evening, and then by Tuesday evening, Dick Campbell was appointed as the East Fife manager. What do you make of the last few days in Methil?
This has been a long time coming, hasn't it? I think everybody knew. I mean, I actually feel really sorry for Greg McDonald, first of all, because I've only met him a couple of times post-match, and he's been a lovely guy, like a really, really pleasant person to talk to. And I know that all these Fife fans have said the same, just a really stand-up guy. Now, when Dumbarton played East Fife, I think it was it must have been the first game of 2024. The talk from people at Dumbarton who'd been talking to people at East Fife, I don't know if it was pals, directors, sponsors, players, whoever, was that if East Fife had lost that game, then Greg McDonald was getting punted and Dick Campbell was getting the job. Now, if I knew about that a month ago, Greg McDonald must have been kind of walking about with this spectre kind of hanging over him, knowing that Dick Campbell was coming in. But I also think if you're East Fife, and Dick Campbell is interested in your job, if you're any League 2 club or League 1 club to a degree as well, but any League 2 club, and Dick Campbell's maybe been sounded out and said, yeah, I'd be interested in the job, you're going to take him up on that offer, aren't you? I mean, the only thing for me would be how motivated is he? Because what he's achieved with Arbroath, he's probably not going to achieve with East Fife in terms of getting them to the heights of the Championship. Like, that was a remarkable achievement. Will there be part of the motivation where it's almost like, well, I've completed it? Like, maybe the motivation goes a wee bit? I don't know. And the other thing is, how much has that got to his head? Because I thought Dick Campbell, towards the end of his time at Arbroath, came across as quite unlikable. Like, he came across as a wee bit of a know-it-all, and I know certainly towards the end of last season with the kind of not playing Bobby Lynn and then hooking him and getting berated by the crowd, felt like he was maybe, I was going to say smarter than the club or smarter than the crowd. Probably is smarter than the crowd, that's why he's a manager and we all pay to get in. But he maybe started to believe a wee bit of hype about himself.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like that thing that the only thing that can maybe hold back Dick Campbell is Dick Campbell here. But if I was an East Fife fan, I would be absolutely delighted. None of those thoughts would have entered my head, and I'd possibly be starting to look, thinking, could we sneak that 4th place?
No, I totally agree. And I do think that on paper, it's probably the best appointment that East Fife could have made. Not just because of his track record, but in terms of the fact that it's felt like even when Darren Young was a manager, it's just felt like they've been going backwards for a number of years now. And of course, if you continue to go backwards when you're in League 2, there is a trapdoor there. But now it feels like that they have somebody who can kind of gather a wee bit of momentum and ultimately lead them away from the trapdoor and potentially lead them up the divisions. Like, I do genuinely think that is the case. It was interesting in terms of, I don't watch too many managerial interviews because they're genuinely formulaic, I suppose. And I normally will watch them if we are going to talk about a specific team on the Lower League podcast. So I've listened to Greg McDonald a couple of times. Always thought he was somebody who came across, regardless of how East Fife performed or their results, always thought he came across very positively. I would say on the back of that 1-0 defeat against Elgin that occurred at the weekend. And I know it's been a long journey. It might have been that he, for a number of reasons, has been stressed or didn't get a good sleep. It might have been nothing to do with that 1-0 defeat. But he looked shattered on Saturday in his post-game interview. And he spoke about the fact that they, regardless of the 1-0 defeat to Elgin have a brilliant home record this season. So it's hardly the worst result in the world. But performance-wise, I mean, East Fife are dreadful. So probably, like you spoke about the fact that when you have a game where you have two teams where maybe the quality isn't great, the second ball is vital. So you have to win tackles, you have to win second balls. And based on that kind of 11-minute highlights package, East Fife won almost none. They maybe had like a 15-minute spell in the first half where they'd done okay. But although I feel sorry for them, it kind of felt like the time was right. And if the East Fife board knew that Dick Campbell was available, then it makes a lot of sense. What I would say is the graphic that they used to announce him was very much photoshopped. He looks a lot younger in that image. Another thing, see if Greg McDonald resigned on Monday evening and Dick Campbell was appointed on Tuesday, how come they have Dick Campbell flat caps available to buy in the East Fife club shop? It feels like this has been lined up for a while.
I would love to know, and I know that there's somebody who'll be listening to this podcast who's connected with East Fife and follows me on Twitter who might be able to tell us how long ago they were ordered in. So if he does want to, then, the identity will remain secret and I will share it with Shaughan and nobody else. But yeah, you would imagine that it's maybe not that easy to get branded bunnets in within 3 hours of appointing Dick Campbell.
Listen, I've never done it. I've never tried to buy branded bunnets. It might be easy. It might be an absolute doddle. I was surprised. That's all I'm saying.
If you're Greg McDonald, you're kind of looking at that and going, no wonder he looks so shattered. No wonder he was so gutted at the weekend. Like, they must have had everything. They were just waiting on the bunnets being delivered so they could finally sack him and put him out of his misery. They've told him weeks ago, like, Greg, once these get delivered, like, you're gone. And he's just like, I had to traipse all the way up to Elgin to play my final game. Why couldn't he have been appointed last weekend?
Poor Greg. But listen, see in terms of League Two, I mean, I suppose East Fife are in the kind of relegation equation. Like I mentioned last week that I still thought that as much as Clyde kind of left it late to bulk up their squad, I suppose, I still thought they had a chance. What are you thinking in terms of the bottom of League Two? I mean, like Bonnyrigg beat Elgin on Tuesday evening, so we could probably discount Bonnyrigg. I don't think Bonnyrigg are particularly good. However, they surely have enough to keep themselves away from that 10th position.
I think it's one of the most interesting divisions. Not the top. The top's basically done. But just that relegation battle, when you consider what's at stake, like, I change every week who I think is going to finish bottom.
But really? Like Clyde are so I know I kind of stuck up for Clyde last week. But then that kind of, like, Barry, I quite enjoyed that. Well, I'm saying I enjoyed the commentary from the game against Peterhead. The brilliant goal from Barry Cuddy to give them a 1-0 lead against Peterhead. Enjoyed the commentator saying it was a daisy cutter, even though it's on a kind of 4G park. Can you have a daisy cutter on an artificial pitch? I'm not entirely sure. But however, they should have finished Peterhead. I mean, they should have been 2 or 3 goals ahead before Peterhead got that penalty in the last minute. But the problem that Clyde have is that as much as they're kind of drawn games and not necessarily losing games anymore, but everybody else is kind of picking up points. Stranraer are drawn games, Forfar are winning games, and like everybody else is generally picking up points. Nobody is on a terrible run. So this Saturday's game against Stranraer is absolutely vital. I think if they don't win it, they are snookered. So you still think that other clubs are above where they are can get sucked in.
Yeah, and I think the weird thing is that basically since Ian McCall came in, I have said to myself, Clyde won't finish bottom. And then I change the team I think will finish bottom pretty much every week, like I said. But I still ignore Clyde. But they've not actually won I think they won 1 or 2 games under McCall. They have drawn a few, and there's certainly a few in there that should have been wins. But, McCall hasn't maybe turned it around as quickly as I would have expected. And he's not addressed the major issue, which is their goalkeeping situation. Yeah. So they've got now a decent amount going forward, like Jordan Allen, Jays Kabaya, Martin Rennie's a pretty effective League 2 player. Connor Young looks like he's quite lively. Cian Leslie out wide has got kind of something about him. They've got decent midfield. Like Alex King's a good player. Barry Cuddihy on the kind of 12 games a season or whatever that he's fully fit for. It's a very good player in League 2. Like, there's a decent amount of quality there. They've strengthened at centre half, like Lee Hamilton coming in, really big addition for them, really important. This week they signed Cammy F. Ballantyne on loan from St Johnstone. And I looked at that and thought, that's an astonishing signing for a team bottom of League 2. Like, they can't possibly finish bottom. And then you look at the league table and you go, whoa, like, it's going to be a bit of a slog. What I think will still happen is I can see Stranraer being very much sucked in. I don't think they have the resources. Well, they don't have the resources that Clyde have. They've got a younger manager. I can see Forfar being sucked in. They're kind of fine defensively and then just have so little going forward. I could have seen East Fife being drawn in up until the Dick Campbell appointment. I think they'll be fine now. I could have seen Bonnyrigg getting drawn in. See, if Bonnyrigg hadn't won last night, I would have said, I think Bonnyrigg are in a real relegation battle. Just because I think the teams like East Fife will improve. Elgin have improved a lot under Alan Hale since he came in. But the big thing that lets them down, and the big reason why I can't overlook Elgin for bottom, is the fact that they have 1 point away from home all season. But
they do have a fantastic home record.
But they're excellent at home. But I look at it and go, you cannot stay up see if they get one more point. So they get 2 points away from home all season. Like, you can't stay up getting 2 points away from home all season. I'm sure you can't. That's the one thing that just keeps playing on my mind. Like, surely you can't stay up with 1 point or 2 points away from home. But I do think they're a lot stronger. So I wonder if we might see Stranraer or Forfar, one of those two, just getting dragged into it a wee bit more. And you end up with a club who maybe find themselves bottom with 3 games to play and go, hang on a minute, we've not been in this situation, and they just aren't capable of turning it around.
Yeah, I think whether or not Stranraer are in bother this season, and I do think they are. The problem Clyde have is they almost need to have promotion-winning form to escape relegation. And bear in mind, they've only won 2 league games this season. That might be beyond them. However, I do fully appreciate that there's been a massive turnover in the squad. So as much as they've only won 2 league games, this squad hasn't won 2 league games, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I expect them to improve. Another thing is, when you look at the teams that have been relegated from League 2, it's generally been the teams that have the worst attendances in Scottish football. Like maybe Brechin and Berwick were outliers. But again, there wasn't too many teams in League 2 that had poorer attendances. And actually, some of the teams that did have poorer attendances, Albion Rovers, Cowdenbeath, they've been relegated. East Stirling, one of the poorest attendances in Scotland, they got relegated. The problem with Stranraer is I appreciate that the attendances in League 2 aren't strong. They're a good couple of hundred behind everybody else. So even if I think Stranraer could get drawn into it, and even if they don't this season, they would still be my team that I would be worried about going forward in terms of how do they stay up, and B, ultimately they'll probably need to attract more fans, and I don't know how to do that. I've probably went off on a tangent there, but regardless, I think if Clyde are going to drag anybody else in, and I think they can, because I think they now have a far better squad than they did at the start of the season, Stranraer are the ones that probably have the most to worry about.
Here's the thing that interests me as well, is if Clyde finish bottom, I probably back them to win the playoffs with that squad, with that manager, right? If Stranraer finish bottom, I don't. If Forfar finish bottom, not sure. If Elgin finish bottom, not sure. Just, I have a belief, I have a trust in Ian McCall, and I have a trust in that squad of players that I go, it's that whole too good to go down thing, which is maybe really daft given how few games they've actually won. But I just feel, and I've been waiting for it to happen, that they're going to hit form. They're going to win one game, and it might be a fluky. It could have been at the weekend if they'd beaten Peterhead, if they'd held on for 30 more seconds and beaten Peterhead, maybe that would have started the run. But I just feel like once they do start winning games, and once McCall's got the new players all settled in, like that's a really capable squad. I mean, if they can add a goalkeeper, I'll be even more confident in that fact. But that's a really capable squad for League 2, and it certainly shouldn't be finishing bottom. I mean, you compare the money that they must have spent, the resources they've got with Stranraer, with Forfar. Forfar have had a kind of strange local approach to players this season, but with Stranraer certainly, or with previous teams that have gone down, like that Clyde team should be miles ahead. But then again, Albion Rovers went down with Charlie Riley and Joe Bevan.
And 38 points. I mean, yeah. 38 points was a decent points total, but they still went down. So I understand where you're coming from. I wonder how Jimmy Chew of Pine Bovril rates their chances poorly, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter who they're playing, he won't back them to get a result. Like, they could come up, East Kilbride could get a dodgy batch of lasagna or whatever it was that hit Tottenham years ago. East Kilbride would go into it with like 9 players and they're all under 20s, and he would be, this is going to be the darkest day in the history of the club, I won't be back to support, and all this sort of stuff. Just one of the most tedious posters on that website. I've
muted them, and it's made the Clyde forum much more agreeable. I quite enjoy it now.
Yeah, they're actually, you see, when you come down to League 2, it won't have been something you've experienced, and I wouldn't wish it on you because it's an unpleasant experience. You go down to League 2, there's not a lot going on in that forum, so it's been quite nice having Clyde there, who actually have quite a few fans on Pine Bovril, and when we've got a match thread, it goes over like 2 pages. It's quite nice.
I'm sure if you were to point out to Clyde fans about how it's great to have them in the League 2 forum, then they'll really take this as a positive. So well done. Yeah, but listen, Fraser, I think, is there anything else you want to discuss about League 2 at this moment in time?
Stennismuir have won the title.
it's looking awful like it.
Good. We don't need to say any more about that because
Nah.
Craig Telfer will be back and he'll talk about that. But
They've won it, haven't they? But no, fair play to them. But listen, Fraser, thanks for your time. And I don't have a quip. Like Craig Telfer says, enjoy your football respectfully. I don't have a quip. Just take care. I suppose is what I'm going to say.